Good afternoon and welcome to the third edition of the European Gas Tech Conference, which today we'll be looking at carbon capture and storage, pyrolysis, and of course bioenergy carbon capture and storage, which are of course important technologies that will help us achieve our climate objectives. We are indeed standing on the brink of a new era with the possibilities under the Net Zero Industry Act for 50 million tonnes of carbon to be stored in Europe by 2030. And so today in Eurogas TECH Conference we will be having an interesting discussion with lots of experts on whether or not they see this as a huge potential for us and what we can actually do to make sure that we achieve those objectives. I'm very happy that we were supported today by GE Vernova, and we will be hearing from them later on in the event. But without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the President of Eurogas, Didier Holleaux, who will be very happy to give the welcome speech to outline the thoughts of Eurogas on this important and very, very critical topic. Thank you, Didier. The floor is yours, and welcome, of course.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank all our speakers, and particularly a member of European Parliament, Penkova, and the representative of the European Commission, Jeroen Schuppers, to attend this conference. I have 5 short messages just to start this conference. The first one is CCS is not really a new technology, but it's a technology which has not reached as yet a meaningful level. And the important question for us is, can we prove it to be scalable so as to have a real influence in Europe? Second, we consider the Net Zero Industry Act as being a game changer, and we fully support the idea to have a target of 50 million tons CO2 storage level by 2030, because that will be the start of scaling up this technology. Third, we consider that CCS is indeed critical for climate target. All reports by IPCC or by International Energy Agency shows that without CCS, without CCU, it will be almost impossible to stay within the limits of the 1.5 degrees. And that's absolutely essential that we are able to do that. Fourth, biogenic CO2 capture will be critical in this process. It will be critical first for the production of renewable fuel of non-biological origin, but it will be also critical in the long run to create to sink, which is a very significant one in order to reach our targets. Fifth, we should not underestimate the technological importance of what we are doing in CCS, particularly developing methane pyrolysis and turquoise hydrogen, developing carbon capture and carbon use techniques will be highly critical in terms of developing new technology and new business in Europe and skilled job in the gas industry in Europe. With these 5 messages, I will stop there, and I just wanted to thank everybody and hope that you will enjoy this conference. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Didier. And I think that there's one thing that is for certain. The 5 main points that you've raised, one of the key threads amongst them all is that we have to have the right policy framework to deliver on the potential of all of those technologies and, of course, to provide the right and secure environment for quality jobs to be maintained in Europe. Well, I think somebody who knows a little bit about the policy framework, and I'm very happy to have such an important keynote speaker with us today, is MEP Tsvetelina Penkova, who is a shadow rapporteur on the Net Zero Industry Act in the European Parliament, and of course a member of the European Parliament's ITRE committee. Good afternoon, Tsvetelina. We're very happy to have you with us today. We'll be very happy to hear your views on the role of CCS and, of course, the latest developments in the NZIA, as it's called, the Net Zero Industry Act. The floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, James, so much for having me here today, because this is indeed an important topic. And Didier was very very specific in addressing those 5 key messages. So I will straight on jump to the point of view from the regulators, as you've asked me to do, because there are certainly some updates coming straight from the Parliament as of yesterday. But if you allow me, I will just take a step back first to just do a very brief overview over the last couple of years in Europe, because I believe this is important to understand the way of thinking of the regulators and why we are doing what we are doing at the moment. So, I mean, in the last 2 years have been, to say the least, quite challenging for the EU and for the whole world, based on a few things that were happening, starting from the COVID pandemic and the disruption of the supply chain, going through the energy crisis that hit Europe as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war. And now what we are observing is the rising escalation in the Middle East. So we see that the geopolitical situation is quite dynamic. And all those problems and obstacles did manage to convince us that we need to focus more on the strategic autonomy, or the so-called strategic independence, even though that's been a topic that we've been discussing in the last few decades, I would say, within Europe. Now it became actually a necessity to address that issue. And the first question, of course, to ask here is, what does it mean? What does it mean to be to have strategic autonomy? How should we achieve it? So, in simple terms, it basically means that we should rely more on ourselves when it comes to certain products and services. So, yes, we should have partners outside of the union that support us. We would definitely always rely on some critical raw materials in imports, but the main focus should be on our efforts, expertise, and technologies that we can develop and we need to boost within the EU. So, in simple terms, the key message that is coming from the regulators with all the legislation, and in specifics the Net Zero Industry Act, which I'm gonna take a few minutes to talk about later, is we must produce most of the energy we consume domestically. And to the biggest extent, we should build the technologies and the components that are needed for the production of that energy. We should also have the manufacturing capacities to do that within the European Union. So basically, that's the baseline logic behind the Net Zero Industry Act. Like the first question is, what are those strategic technologies that we need to be able to achieve the green economy, the green energy, the green transition in general? How can we fund them? And do we have the sufficient work labor force to make sure that those production and manufacturing capacities would be sustainable and can survive within the EU? So, as I said, the first one was to analyze those few strategic sectors which are crucial for the new production sites in Europe. And I'm happy to say and to announce we've put a lot of work with the colleagues from the European Parliament on that. But technologies like carbon capture and storage and the infrastructure for transporting the captured carbon also fall under the definition of the net zero technologies that we just voted yesterday at the European Parliament. So we did manage to include all the CCUS technologies in the scope. We did extend it a bit because the initial proposal, it was just in bits and pieces of the value chain and the infrastructure. But speaking with experts and speaking with the industry, and like I know we have a lot of representatives here today at the seminar, it's been crucially pointed out and hinted to us that if we want to have something successful, we need to look at the whole value chain and make sure that all bits and pieces are included. Just looking at one little aspect, which is easier to understand why it is directly contributing to the green transition, it's not going to be sufficient or sustainable. So we kept hard to keep the technological neutral approach in our final text, but we focus on supporting all the technologies that reduce the emissions of CO2 out of the atmosphere. So we saw from early stage that if we enable the CCUS in the scope of the legislation, we'll create synergies between multiple sectors which can feed each other, and afterwards also increase Europe's industrial base. So the key message here is everything is in the scope. They're gonna benefit from some easing on the permitting procedures. They're gonna benefit all those technologies. They're gonna benefit from the funding we have predicted for that, which is sufficient. Definitely not gonna be enough, but it is. We have steps in the right direction, and we should be able to produce all those necessary parts of the technological components as a domestic production. So, and the last but not least, if you allow me, I'll just emphasize on another important aspect, which has been quite an important topic during the negotiations of the Net Zero Industry Act in the Parliament, is the growing lack of qualified labor force. This is something which has been reoccurring and coming up in many conversations we're having with the industry, with the academia all over Europe. It's not typical for one member state, it is typical for all of them, which is something that has to be addressed as of now, immediately, simply because we don't want to end up in a situation a few years from now when we realize that we have invested, we've built those manufacturing capacities, we're boosting the innovation, but we actually don't have the specialists and the expertise to develop it further and take it to the next stage. Because when we're speaking about those things, our key goal should be to keep the strategic advantage and to keep the competitive edge of European economy, technology, and innovation. That's the only way we can be successful in our path towards the Green Deal on the global scale. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tsvetelina. And I think you touched on some really important points there. Indeed, starting on the point about strategic autonomy, I think carbon capture and storage gives us a great opportunity also to develop a European industry, which links very much into the jobs point that you made. And I think that we fully support that. In Eurogas, we're working very closely with the unions to develop a European framework agreement to allow the current workers in the gas sector to learn the skills to work on technologies like carbon capture and storage and hydrogen for the future. And we hope to be able to complete that in the next year. So we do see this as very much being part of the overall, shall we say, clean economy and helping people to find meaningful jobs whilst keeping industry competitive. Well, I think our next keynote speaker will indeed have quite a few views on some of those points about how we do keep our industries competitive and that we do manage this transition very well. Jeroen, it's really great to have you with us. We have Jeroen Schuppers, who of course the Deputy Head of Unit from the Clean Energy Transition Unit in DG Research. Jeroen, maybe you'd like to outline some of the views of the European Commission on how we're going to move CCS forward and the role that you foresee for it to achieve our net zero targets. Thank you.
Absolutely, James, and many thanks for inviting me, and also thanks to Ms. Penkova for outlining the NZIA, the Net Zero Industry Act. Just like the previous speaker, I'd like to take you a few years back to put this a little bit in perspective of our research and innovation policy that we have set over the years. A few points I want to make. First point is that research and innovation policy at European level has paid off, has brought the technology really to a point that it is on the shelf and ready to be used. We started this about 30 years ago, around the first large-scale project in Norway, the Sleipner project, which was an industrial project. We supported the first research and innovation projects around that industrial project, looking at aquifer storage. This was in the 4th and the 5th framework program. So this is where we come from already. Those first projects have actually ignited in a number of member states the first CCS research programs following the framework programs. So that was an important point, absolutely. We over the years a narrative in a research and innovation policy from CCS being applied to the fossil fuel power industry, so using it for coal and gas-fired power plants, to a use in industry where you do not have other alternatives to decarbonize. The power industry has, of course, renewables to decarbonize. The steel and cement industry do not. To give you an example, the emissions, CO2 emissions from the cement industry are for 60% so-called process emissions come from the material from which you make the limestone from which you make the cement. So there CCS is important. And we supported a number of projects, important pilots over the years in the steel industry, in refineries, and in the cement industry as well. And that has brought a lot of interest from the cement industry, and we are actually very much advanced now. Taking you back to 2009, that was an important landmark as well, because in the midst of an economic downturn in Europe, the European Commission had the opportunity to use a budget from the agricultural policy, several billions of euros, to inject it in the economy. And 1 billion was given to CCS, so we could support 6 large demonstration projects in Europe in different member states. You may remember in Germany, Poland, Spain, Italy, the UK, and the Netherlands, with between 150 and 180 million euros each from us, matching funding from the member states, and of course, industry commitment. They got off a good start during this budget that was helping them to solve the capital expenditure part of the story. But unfortunately, one after the other, they failed and they stopped. Reasons being from lack of regulatory framework to public acceptance. But first and foremost, closing the financial gap was the main obstacle at the time. For 2 reasons, mainly. First of all, of course, the economic downturn at the moment, which made it difficult for project promoters to secure funding from the financial markets. But most importantly, the CO2 price under the ETS that had dropped from about 10 euros per ton to 5 or 6 euros per ton in 2012. And as a result, although the capital part, the capital investment could be secured, the operational continuation, operational costs could not be carried by such a low CO2 price. Now, when we see the CO2 price over the last years, from 2012 to 2019, approximately, it accelerated to 30 euros per ton. And currently we are at close to 100 euros per ton. This has had 2 major effects on CCS in Europe. First of all, there is now a business case for industrial players to take on such large projects and to cover the operational costs. Secondly, and this is important, the Innovation Fund, which is a large fund for commercial demonstration, so a step further from our research and innovation program, has now increased enormously their budgets because they are funded from the emission trading scheme. And as a result, you see the latest call from the ETS Innovation Fund 2023 has 5 projects in CCS, all in the cement industry, that will build a full CCS chain from capture to storage. Now, this shows that CCS, and that's my second point, CCS is now ready for deployment. We should not wait any further. We have to deploy now. And we can also use not just the Innovation Fund and the CO2 price, but to use the Connecting Europe facility for financing cross-border transport of CO2. And this is really helping a lot already. So yes, CCS is ready for deployment, but still we need to scale up significantly the capacity by, let's say, 100 times at least in the next 30 years. And this is where the Net Zero Industry Act that Madam, our previous speaker, Madam Penkova came to speak about, the Net Zero Industry Act, which has an ambition to achieve an annual injection capacity in CO2 storage of 50 megatons by 2030, and which puts a burden on the member states and on the industry to disclose information on geological data relating to oil and gas production, and also to open up their storage sites. So yes, we're ready for deployment, but, and I come to my last point, there is still a lot to be done. The challenges are still many. We need research and innovation because although we cannot wait with deployment now, we can still do better for the future. And there the challenges, of course, are well known. We have to decrease the energy penalty of the capture process to make the energy capture process more energy efficient and therefore much more cost effective as well. We need to see what CO2 does on the infrastructure, different mixtures of CO2, different compositions. How does it behave in the reservoir? How can we have a long-term and affordable monitoring schedule? All these issues require longer-term research. For this, we are in constant dialogue with the stakeholders, both industry and members and research organizations, through the Strategic Energy Technology Plan, in which we have a big platform, the Zero Emissions Platform, which unites most of the stakeholders of CCS in Europe. And on top of this, and this is important as well, it's my last point, we are supporting all the geological surveys in Europe, more than 30 countries, into a big 20 million euro action on the Horizon Europe to a European geological service, geological service for Europe. And this service will deliver also a pan-European inventory of subsurface storage space, not just for CO2, but also for hydrogen, which will become more and more important, and for energy storage, for example, compressed air or heat and cold storage. And this will ultimately as well, of course, strongly support the ambition of the Net Zero Industry Act, because it's the geological surveys that have all the data needed to accelerate the start. And this is still where the bottleneck is. So in conclusion, I think, yes, the EU is well placed to move forward with CCS. We need the involvement of all the stakeholders concerned, both public and private, so as well from your side. And in this, you can count on our full support. I stop here. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Jeroen. And I think you can also count on Eurogas's full support. And indeed, we will look very much to work together to make sure that we are able to deliver the objectives that we are setting ourselves around CCS. So thanks very much for your point. I also appreciated the good review. And this is not a new technology, as also Didier had mentioned. I think people forget that 15 years ago we were doing the CCS directive back in 2008-9. And so we have had a legal framework, and there have, of course, been many projects that have been financed. However, I think the new impetus is all being driven around the Net Zero Industry Act and this sort of targeting of 50 million tonnes of storage. So I really appreciate the outline that you've given also for the financing and the opportunities, Jeroen. So I do think that we can say that we are moving forward into a new era. And I think that's how we see it in Eurogas, that after many years where perhaps some people have felt a little bit disappointed, we now see a much more positive mentality towards what the future can hold for these technologies. So in a way, the question of today is about the Advantage EU, and I think that we have to say we have a history in it. Now it's about making sure that we develop that history into something more successful. So thanks once again to MEP Penkova and to Jeroen for giving those good introductory speeches. I think they've both touched on very important elements, certainly relating to the competitiveness of industry and the necessity to have carbon capture and storage for such activities here in Europe in the long run. And indeed, also, I do believe that we talked about the skills that are needed for workers. And that is, of course, going to be very, very crucial and often can be a bottleneck in getting new technologies out. And I'm sure that you will all agree that it is good that we work already with the unions to try and make sure we maintain the possibility for workers to transfer into these new areas. I think that the other point you mentioned, Jeroen, and I know you're off screen now, but in principle, the idea of what we have to look at in terms of geological storage, and I am actually reassured, though, that with the work that you've done, that the 50 million tonnes is a achievable target by 2030, and that there is the right kind of storage available in different parts of Europe, not just the North Sea. So indeed, there are different challenges. It's never easy to do these new technologies in terms of the mass deployment of them, and I'm new in that respect. But we do have that know-how, and let us hope we can see today through the course of the next panels whether or not we are indeed in a situation where we can say Advantage EU. Well, and I'm very happy to say that we have the great and talented Sasha Twining coming back with us. I mean, it's nice to see you again, Sasha. I'm really happy to have you working with us in Eurogas to moderate very, very well, way much better than I can, our panels, and really get to the bottom of these issues. And we will be looking at carbon capture and storage, and then we'll also look at pyrolysis and BECCS. And so I think we have a really good afternoon lined out. But I think you're going to be introducing, first of all, our introductory speaker from our partners at GE Vernova. Good to see you, Sasha. I'm handing over to you, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the conference. Thanks and good luck.
Brilliant. Brilliant, James. Thank you very much. Thank you. As you say, there's so much to talk about, so much to get through. And I think this is going to be a really interesting couple of hours ahead as we look and see what different people from throughout the value chain are doing now with this whole span of technology. You know, I had to catch myself there because I nearly said new technology, but of course the point has been made that this has been around for a while. But the question now is 23, 24 the years where we really do see a boom in this area? It looks from our previous speakers that, yes, we should do, but everyone has laid out challenges ahead, not least challenges to work as well. So, James, you're right, a lot to get through. Now, before we get into our panels and presentations, let me just tell you how you get in touch with us, because as always, I know you watching this will have a lot of questions, or maybe just areas that you would like our speakers to concentrate on and talk about, simply because as we stand here at the beginning of this real challenge with CCS and pyrolysis, we need to ask lots and lots of questions. So anything that you want to know more about, type it into the Q&A box on your screen. I will be able to see your questions here, and I will put as many as I can to our panelists. So, to start, we're going to hear from a company that produces technology and equipment right across the value chain, and that is GE Power. I'm very pleased that we have with us today, talking about the role of carbon capture in the energy transition. We have the Decarbonisation Strategy and Partnership Programme Leader, Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa. Please welcome Rodrigo Moliner. Rodrigo, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us what you feel the role of CCS and the other technologies are in the transition.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sasha, and thanks to Eurogas for organizing this session today and having the opportunity to attend it on such an interesting topic such as carbon capture. So I hope there is nobody amongst us who doesn't believe that climate change it will be a critical technology issue that we're going to have to face now and in the future. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we are seeing already, and they warn that we will experience more and more rainfall patterns change, droughts, intensive flooding, and increasing temperature increasing ambient temperature in the cities in several regions. So they also warn that the sea level is going to continue increasing throughout the 21st century. And that's because of CO2 emissions. That's because of greenhouse gases, right? So CO2 emissions account for 89% of the total greenhouse gases coming from industrial processes and energy combustion. And according to Climate Action Tracker, if we look at how countries, European Union and all countries globally are doing with their current policies in place, we will be only achieving results of 2.7 degrees above pre-industrial levels, 2.7 degrees Celsius, which is far away from the target we have agreed to set at 1.5. So it means there is a lot to do. So there is more effort we have to put into this, and we're going to talk about how carbon capture can help with this. So these climate disasters could not only produce and cause human harm and deaths, it's causing currently big economic impact to countries, to companies, and eventually to individuals, right? Focusing in Europe, Europe has a commitment, the Union has a commitment according to Fit for 55 program to decrease a total of 29% of emissions until 2030 from now. That means around 4.5% of decrease per year from now until 2030, whereas in the last decade, we have only managed to achieve 1.8%. So that gives us a sense of the scale of the big gap we have to close, right? In terms of absolute value, we're talking about removing 900 million tons of CO2 per year in the European Union. So emissions reductions need to speed up. I think that's a fact. And then I'd like to talk about the role that the power generation sector, the energy sector plays in this CO2, right, emissions. So in Europe only, excluding captive power at industrial places, we're talking about 1/3 of the total CO2 emissions coming from the power industry. If we look at the global figure, we're talking about 40%. So it's very significant, and that's why this sector becomes a critical one to tackle CO2 emissions, right? So then the question is, understanding the harm that CO2 causes, the implications it has in the climate change, what is the fastest and the most realistic way to decarbonize the energy sector? Well, there's no single technological solution to provide a full solution for this. The right mix of energies that combined will provide decarbonized and reliable power that is affordable and obviously sustainable, right? One of the pillars is switching from coal to gas. That will kill already from 50 to 60% of the emissions. And that's, I think, an area in which we are all in agreement in Europe, and we're seeing measures towards that. Another big step, and that's a big target of the Commission, is to continue and even, I would say, speed up the deployment of massive renewable energy. And that's something in which GE Vernova is supporting with. I will talk about that later. The thing is, with renewable energy, this is an intermittent source of energy. So due to that intermittent nature, we're going to need the complement of gas power generation to provide continuity and reliability in the power supply, right? So also there is a fact that the grids have been designed decades ago based on synchronous assets. So decarbonized rotating energy assets are going to be required to stabilize the grid and to provide dispatchable energy that is reliable and that is flexible enough, right? And that's where capture comes in place, because it will be coupled to these reliable and dispatchable assets that can complement renewable energy in a decarbonized way. So talking a bit about the carbon capture, this is not a new technology. It's important to say, sometimes we hear people saying it's a promising technology as some others that we are now pushing to develop in this energy transition. It's a technology that is being in place since the 70s, and it's something that is and it's something that we know, and the technology and the resources are available today, right? So we think that now, with the current European Commission member states releasing their national energy and climate plans to the European Union, it's the time for the EU to lead the energy transition, leveraging this important tool to be able to achieve and to build a decarbonized, balanced energy mix. Right? So now I'd like to touch on what are the ingredients or what needs to happen for carbon capture. When I say carbon capture, I mean CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration, to crystallize and to really become a viable option in all aspects. No? So first, and I think this has been said, but I think it's worth highlighting it again, we need a transparent and predictable policy framework in which emitters can design their decarbonization strategy with a clear path, and investors have the certainty that there is a financial viability for the project. Then we also need, of course, the development of CO2 transportation and storage infrastructure to be in place, because the question always comes: what do we do with the CO2? emitters are willing to get rid of the CO2, but they are going to need this infrastructure. So we're seeing the draft of the Net Zero Industry Act proposing 50 million tons per annum by 2030, which is very good news. It's a good step in the right direction. But the fact is that there are studies showing that in Europe we have capacity of in the range of gigatons, right? So there is more to do. Then in terms of identifying the CO2 storage locations, we need to make sure that we're involving the oil and gas companies who have the knowledge and the experience to support with this in an efficient way, and that we accelerate the permitting process from the governments for them to operate, and that these storage locations are suitable to the source of emissions, right? We see big development in the north of Europe and maybe not so much in the south. So this has to be accommodated to the source of the emissions. Another aspect is to reduce the risk in the supply chain, right? This is a complex supply chain in which we capture the CO2, that transport it onshore or offshore or by sea, by pipeline to a long distance, and then we store it. And there is going to be several companies, several players involved in the supply chain. We think there needs to be a strategy defined that then it's converted into a legislative proposal for that in order to have a clear pathway, such as it has happened with the hydrogen supply chain, right? In the case of the European hydrogen backbone, for example. So then a key question comes when we talk about the financial viability and how do we support business models and make projects bankable. We think there has to be government incentives, and this may sound maybe weird if we talk about it at the beginning, but it's in the same way we were supporting the development of renewable energy maybe 30 years ago. Initially, we need to scale up the technology, and there needs to be some incentives. Later on that same scheme, we're going to need to develop mechanisms like contracts for difference or dispatchable power agreements, so that those investors that have decided to go for a decarbonized solution remain competitive in the market, right? This is important. Then talking about power market designs and specifically about the remuneration schemes, we need to value the energy that is going to be not only the energy produced in terms of megawatt hours, but the energy that is going to be, there's going to be dependable, the dependable capacity that is going to be in the market. So the megawatts itself and the ancillary services that will be provided to the grid that other forms of energy cannot provide. That's where gas power, again, coupled to carbon capture, plays a key role. And then lastly, to make projects viable, I think the ETS system, it's a good way to incentivize this, along with the carbon border adjusting mechanism that is just now being rolled out. We just need to make sure that the increase in these levies come along the implementation of those previous measures, so that there is a smooth transition for all the emitters to proceed and to be able to create their own solutions, right? And then last but not least, carbon capture is going to be a phenomenal vector and a great vehicle to create employment in the EU globally. So we think that it's required to create a solid supply chain in which the development of the required capabilities to create high employment jobs, it's fostered, and then this can go forward. It's a motivation for everybody. So all of these are the ingredients that we think need to be met for carbon capture to crystallize in the energy sector, and for us to have a resilient power generation, resilient grid, and to be able to achieve the targets that we have agreed to, that otherwise we're seeing we may not get there. So thank you very much.
Rodrigo, thank you very much. Thank you. That's quite a list, I have to say, quite a list of of challenges and things that you have on your to-do list of what you say is important. I'm really pleased, actually, you talked about the complexity of what a supply chain and a value chain would look like and how many different players there will be with their respective investors, with their respective industries that they are working with and their respective supply chains as well. And it just goes to show how complex this is. So it's all very well this technology being ready, but actually when it's putting it into use, that is where a lot more challenges possibly will be. An interesting point that you talked about, it will need incentives from your point of view. That's what you say it will need. Rodrigo, would you stay with us and join our first panel and have more of an open discussion about this? So wonderful, thank you. So let me introduce our other panelists, and then we can sort of get more into a conversation about how different parts of the value chain see this going forward. So let us now focus in on the EU's leadership in CCS and CCUS, as well as the pace that is going to be needed to meet these targets. So let me welcome our next set of panelists. We have Johanna Voegstal from the CCUS team at DG ENER at the European Commission. Rodrigo is staying with us as well. Gulren Turan, who is the General Manager, Advocacy and Communications at the Global CCS Institute, who obviously have been talking about this technology for a very long time. And Etienne Didier, the Vice President at CCS Business Unit at Total Energies. So to my panelists, welcome. It's good to see you all there. And I hope you are looking forward to a good discussion on this with probably a lot of varied points. So we will try and cover as much as possible. Before we start, I wonder if I could ask you all just one simple question each, if that is okay. So what I would like to know is, how far along the line do you feel we are towards having a secure and well-established CCS full value chain within the EU? Now, I appreciate from everything that we've heard, we're saying we're right at the beginning, but if you look at that with one being just starting out, just thinking about it, to 10 being all parts thriving, meeting its full potential, lots of innovation, lots of investment, connected sectors all thriving as well. That's number 10. Where would you say we are at the moment, 1 to 10? Johanna, would you like to go first for us? Just 1 to 10. I know it's tricky, but where do you think we are?
Thank you so much, Sasha. So just a number, no?
Just a number. Go on, give me the number, and I'm going to go around the room. So let's see all four and see what you reckon. It's tricky, isn't it?
So if I can maybe divide it into two, I think in terms of technology, maybe 8 or 9, if 10 is the highest one. But in terms of business models and the market, I would say maybe 4. There are still things to do.
4. Okay, wonderful. Johanna, thank you very much. Let's quickly let's bring back in Rodrigo. What do you reckon? So 8 and 9 and 4 when it comes to business models, do you put it?
I actually have a similar way of thinking as Joanna. I don't think we passed yet, so I will give it a 4 or less, because we are obviously not ready yet. But I think we can very quickly improve and get A grade if we get the policy and the incentives in place. So I think we're ready to jump to 9 or 10 in a few years or even months if all the mechanisms are in place. But for now, we don't pass.
Okay, so that's a really interesting answer. So 4 at the moment, but really quickly jump to an 8 or 9. That would be a really interesting graph to see. Gulren, now from the Global CCS Institute, I know your ambition would be at 10, but where do you think the value chain is at the moment?
I do agree with Johanna and Rodrigo that in terms of the current state, I think we're below a 5. But I'm looking at the glass being half full, and I think we've made some incredible achievements in the past few years. So I think the momentum certainly above 5. So the momentum is picking up.
Okay, shall I put you at a momentum for 7 or a momentum for 8?
Momentum for 7. I think we've got room to go.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, and Etienne, where do you feel we are?
I think I will concur with what was said previously. I believe the momentum is around 7. In terms of technical maturity, we are there. It's a technology that has been developed for 4 years. So, but aligning everybody on the value chain, managing liabilities, managing permitting, incentivizing the investors, and building a business model takes time. And on that side, we can progress a lot.
Okay, it is fascinating to hear you all answer that, because actually, even though we all know we're just starting out, it's really good to hear you break it down as to how you feel we're going. So what Eurogas has asked all of our panelists to do is to prepare a few thoughts to share with you. So this is how they see the current situation and the future as well for this new technology, or this quickly growing technology. Johanna from the Commission, would you like to take the floor first and give us your thoughts?
Sure. Thank you so much. So yeah, my name is Johanna Fiksdal. I work as a policy officer in the CCUS team in DG NR. So what I wanted to do now, just as a quick presentation or introduction, is to first of all give you an overview of where we are in terms of the industrial carbon management strategy, including 2 studies on CO2 transport infrastructure. And then secondly, provide you a quick update on the CCUS forum. So first of all, regarding the industrial carbon management strategy, or ICM as we now call it instead of the CCS acronym, this will cover both CCS, CCU and industrial carbon removals. And it's not happening out of the blue, I would say. We already have a lot of existing framework and projects. For example, the Innovation Fund, which is already financing a lot of CO2 projects, and the PCI CO2 list. And then secondly, as already mentioned, we have established the CCUS forum, where we have regular meetings, and the different working groups have already provided issue papers, which will contribute with inputs to our strategy. The third element, I would say, driving the strategy is, of course, the Net Zero Industry Act. And yeah, you're already aware of this, so I will not go into the details, but just emphasize that negotiations are still ongoing, so it's a bit dynamic. And then on the 2 studies that we have commissioned now on CO2 transport and storage infrastructure. So the first one was published before summer. It was done by NTech, so TNO and Trinomics. This study is focusing on regulations and to what extent there is a need for a dedicated regulatory framework for CO2 market and infrastructure. And I think this touches upon very relevant elements for this audience. For example, the need for long-term planning and coordination across the value chain, how to create the business models, the need for a certain degree of common standards for CO2, as well as what lessons we can learn from other network industries such as natural gas and hydrogen. And then the second study that we are finalizing now is done by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. And this study is focusing on how we can optimize the grid. So trying to develop scenarios for how we see that the infrastructure can develop by mapping the different storage sites and also the emitters across Europe. So in that sense, we will be able to understand better how to build this in a cost-optimized way. But again, it's noted that this is right now a theoretical exercise because we don't know yet how this will develop. But I think this will be a very good tool for us now in terms of the network planning. And eventually when we see that the market is developing and we see the pipelines and the projects not only being announced, but also taking FIDs, then it will also make more sense to understand how we can develop the infrastructure further. And then back to the strategy, just to mention that we already had a public consultation on this, and I guess a lot of you already participated. We were very happy with the results from this consultation. We received quite a lot of feedbacks, both on the questionnaire, but also in terms of issue papers, where stakeholders could express themselves more freely. And we organized a workshop on the 6th of October with a lot of good discussions. So this will also be evaluated as part of the inputs for the strategy. So in terms of possible elements for the strategy, I think I already mentioned a few of them that are connected with the studies that we are doing. But for this audience, as was already mentioned also by Rodrigo, the need to have to reduce the risks in the value chain, to create the business models and to make sure that we have coordination on an EU level. This is something that we focus on. So from DG Energy perspective, of course, the transport infrastructure is very important, but we also, of course, cooperate very closely with DG Klima on the strategy. So the capture side and the storage capacity needs are also very important. So just to summarize then on the CCUS forum, like I said, we have different working groups on infrastructure, industrial partnerships, public perception, and the strategy in itself. And right now we are planning for the plenary meeting in Aalborg, which is taking place the 27th and 28th of November. And I must say that this has also been very popular to sign up for physical participation. So afraid to say that it reached full capacity already, but I would like to invite everyone to attend online. That is also possible. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to discussing this more with you now. So thank you. Back to you, Sasha.
Johanna, thank you very much. Thank you. I have to say, just on your last point, I saw the smile on your face when you talked about it reaching full capacity, and I think that just to show actually how many people are very interested in this. Johanna, you mentioned many studies that you were in the process of conducting or were in the process of analysing. Could you give us the one that you really feel could unlock some of the challenges, if I can put it that way? If you could look for like a priority of what you're waiting for to sort of push the next step forward, which of those would it be? What's most important?
So right now, I think I'm very eager to publish the study by JRC, so the one on optimizing the grid, because I think that this will also create a very good basis for all stakeholders involved. So, for example, a cement plant wondering where they should send their CO2, they can use this tool to try to see where they could connect them. And I can also maybe add that JRC decided to use an open source now for their solution. So the goal now is really to make others also play with this tool to understand also how they can develop the infrastructure. So I think this will be very important. And another aspect maybe, and especially for this audience, is the role not only on network planning, but to do it in an integrated approach. So to see it in connection with other networks. So, for example, we're also looking into how to facilitate the reuse and repurposing of existing infrastructure. So both gas pipelines and depleted oil and gas fields. So this is also something that we will look more into this year. Yeah, thank you.
Indeed, actually, you've already got questions on that about reusing the infrastructure. So we'll try and maybe go into that in a little bit more detail as we go through. Rodrigo, I know you've already addressed the audience with your thoughts on the role of CCS. Is there anything that you'd like to take a couple of minutes to talk about as well?
Yeah, I think deep diving a bit on the role that the role that the electric sector or the energy sector in which we are specialized is going to play in the REPowerEU targets. I'd just like to mention some of the targets versus what can be achieved and challenges. So if we look at the REPowerEU, the strategy, and that's a recent binding commitment, is to target 42.5% of the renewable energy share, consumed energy share, by 2030. Currently at 22%, so that means doubling the installed capacity. And that's perfectly fine. GE Vernova is it's into that. We are all in. We have the capability to provide a lot of technology in terms of renewable. That's what we do. But we're seeing a bottleneck in the grid when it comes to the growth of renewable due to the grid's capability to absorb that much power installed, right? So as an example, in Ireland, which is obviously an island, it may be an extreme case, but it's happening in other places. Last year only, they saw how they lost 8% of the energy. So they suffer 8% energy curtailment on renewables because the grid was not able to transmit the power. They don't have the flexibility. Similar things are being observed, and they have even worse figures in 2021 and 2020. So things are improving slowly than they should. We're seeing similar cases in Germany and Italy and Spain, where the points of generation are not close or not necessarily where the points of consumption are. So there is a challenge in terms of transporting that energy. Now the commitment is to install in Europe to install 600 gigawatts of photovoltaic by 2030 and an additional 500 gigawatts of wind, which is a massive. It's a threefold increase of power installation versus the last 8 or 10 years. So it's a massive acceleration. And the grids cannot absorb at the moment the amount of power that is being built. So we think that in order to achieve this target, and I repeat, the energy sector is accountable for a major or for a big chunk of the emissions, at least a third of them, but maybe more. We think there are some improvements that need to be done. One of the main actions that is an urgent action is investing in the grid capacity. That's an obvious fact that has to be addressed, because otherwise we're having cost inefficiency that at the end we're having energy that is being wasted, and that has to come with the flexibility of a system that will more and more have intermittent resources, energy resources, and distributed power, right? That will be located far away from the main point of consumption. So we need to value that the stability, and the proposed draft from the European Commission may not be enough. We don't think it's enough in terms of energy demand and battery storage to manage that reliability and sustainability, stability of the grid, right? So that's to say that carbon capture will be needed to accommodate the current gas power energy that accounts for a major part of the consumption in some countries, even 40% in some seasons. And then if we go to the targets of REPowerEU for hydrogen, it's a similar thing. They have the commitment to produce 10 million tons by 2030 of green hydrogen and import another 10. But we're going to need more hydrogen than that, that's for sure. And that's where it comes blue hydrogen, in which we will need to decarbonize the hydrogen coming from the natural gas. So all in all, the Net Zero Industry Act is a good proposal. We just think that it's too early to exclude any potential application of carbon capture in any sector. We need to consider it as a tool, as a very valid tool to decarbonize all sectors. Of course, hard to abate industries, of course, cement, steel, chemical industries that don't have alternatives, but need to consider the piece of the great reliability and frequency stability that certain assets can provide. So we think is a key piece to meet the energy, the emission reduction targets.
Okay, Rodrigo. Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you very much. Thank you. So making it very clear that you think this is absolutely critical, the way that you see the energy transition playing out. Jeroen, let me turn to you now. Let's get an update from the Global CCS Institute, which I have to say will be very interesting. You've had a very, very busy last 12 months, sort of with all the changes, different regulations, lots of different meetings, I imagine, and really pushing the industry forward. So over to you. Give us your update.
Thanks very much, Sasha, and thanks again to Eurogas for inviting us today to be here. I'll give my comments in three parts. Very quickly, I'll talk about the status of CCS globally, and we've already covered it in a number of conversations, but a number of speakers about the need for CCS, but point that out. Talk about the status of CCS, carbon capture, use and storage in Europe. And finally, I'll just talk a little bit about where we think we need to go from here, particularly in Europe. So as a number of our speakers mentioned already, we know that carbon capture, use and storage is a proven, it's a versatile, and it's a safe climate technology that is necessary to meet our climate targets to get to net zero emissions. We have already mentioned that CCS facilities have been operations. We talk about it as a new technology, but CCS facilities have been operation for the past 50 years. 1970s and started in the US, and in Europe, Sleipner in Norway started in 1996, so it's been around for quite a few years. It's a safe technology, just reminding ourselves that CO2 is a gas, carbon dioxide itself does not combust. Geological happens in formations that are at least a kilometer that underground, and carefully selected formations, some of which have contained oil and gas for the previous thousands of years. It is safe by design, and it's also made safe by regulation. Currently, there are 37 large-scale commercial facilities operating around the world with a capacity to capture and store around 50 million tons of CO2 per year. And just to give a sense of scale, this is equivalent to taking at least 10 million cars off the road in a year. So we're talking about large-scale industrial decarbonization. And currently, there are more than 200 facilities in very different stages of development in the pipeline around the world. CCS is a versatile technology, climate technology that can help us in a number of ways. Again, we alluded to some of those. First and foremost, probably in Europe, one of its biggest use is in hard to abate sectors such as cement and steel. These are materials and commodities that we need to continue to use, that our lives depend on, but we can't live with the emissions that are produced. For example, cement industry accounts for 8% of global emissions, and CCS is the only technology we have today available that can deeply decarbonize these industrial applications. Another application is for the production of low carbon hydrogen at scale. We can produce hydrogen either through electrolysis or through use of CCS, which we can then use to decarbonize industry, transport, etc. A further application, which Rodrigo talked about, of course, is through the provision of dispatchable power. It enhances the reliability and the resiliency of our electricity system, so CCS can have a use in power generation. And last but not least, either through direct air capture or combining it with bioenergy, CCS can help address historic emissions, the CO2 emissions that are already in the atmosphere. So it can help us it can help facilitate carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere, which the science says that we will need to do as well. So when we look at Europe, we know that CCS is fundamental part of our net zero journey, and Johanna talked about this at some length. The adoption of the EU Green Deal, the climate law, the subsequent proposals make CCS an important part of EU's decarbonisation efforts. Now, we already have a regulatory framework for safe transport and storage of CO2. Excuse me. It's the 2009 CCS directive for CCS in Europe.
There we go. I was going to say, don't worry, Jeroen. Tell you what, you turn your microphone off for a moment. I know what it's like when this happens, so have a good cough. We'll come back to you in a moment. And there are lots of questions for you, but you've given us a fantastic update already. So 37 sites, projects already around the world, 200 sort of at various stages, sort of not quite online or at fruition at the moment. How are you? Are you good to continue?
I'm feeling better, thanks so much.
Fantastic. If you need to pause again, don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Can I just drill down into those figures, though, if I may? The 200 at various stages. I mean, various stages could quite simply mean someone has expressed an interest,
Sure.
or it could just be before final investment.
We've got roughly a dozen, sorry, not dozen, sort of close to 20 under construction, and the rest in kind of what we categorize as advanced stage of development or earlier stages of development, not including announced projects. So we undertake a level of due diligence at the Institute, and if we've just heard about something being announced, we categorize it in announced, but we assess the sort of the stage of development of these projects. And in Europe, we at the moment have more than 100 of these are actually in Europe, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, actually. So when you look at the world, because obviously we've seen Australia and the US really sort of pushing forward with this as well, but in the EU, and we've already heard today from our previous speakers, and MEP Penkova, who were saying, look, we need to concentrate on those EU value chains within the member states. So what are we looking like when it comes to sites or projects, you know, nearing FID?
That's a great point. So if we look at it like glass half full, 100 projects, fantastic. But if you look at actually the operating capacity, we have less than 5 million tons a year of operating capacity in Europe, a lot less in EU, because of course a lot of this is Norway. Thankfully, Porthos project in Rotterdam just reached FID last week, or maybe in the last 10 days, which is great. So finally, another project. Of course, we've got the Northern Lights in Norway under construction. So, but this is all in the context of we need to get to 300 million tons in the EU by 2040 and some 400 to 500 million tons by 2050. This is in the Commission's kind of estimates of how much CCS capacity we need. So there's a long way to go. There's a massive scaling up that needs to happen. And we know that in the OECD in Europe, these projects take a long time. They take 7 to 8 years. The Net Zero Industry Act is aiming to address this sort of streamline this problem, shortening regular timelines. I think it's going to be important. And of course, we're looking forward to seeing the EU industrial CCS carbon management strategy being released in early 2014, which I think is critical. It's something that the industry is really waiting to see. And last but not least, of course, it's not just about the EU, but let's not forget the member states. The member states need to progress their own CCS strategies. We're seeing, for example, Germany and France doing this at the moment. And I want to just finish, cognizant of the time, that I think Denmark, for example, great case study of how quickly CCS can be progressed when public-private partnerships work. The government realized that CCS is needed to get to net zero around 2020. There was a cross-partisan sort of agreement in Denmark, and they really kind of said, let's go with this. And kind of first injection started earlier in 2023, and now Ørsted's project is going straight into sort of shortly going into hopefully construction as well. So things can move fast if governments, companies, and society work hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeroen. Thank you. Interesting point, but such a true point that actually you need, yes, things can happen quickly, but you need all the right ingredients and you need the right players to all be moving in the same direction and at speed as well. Thank you. Well, let's get the view now from TotalEnergies. Etienne, over to you. Give us your updates, your tech updates, what you're doing and where you see your role and the future of this particular part of technology.
Okay, thanks, Sasha. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Etienne Anglès-Dariac, so I'm responsible for the CCS business unit of TotalEnergies. Many thanks to Eurogas for inviting me. I will just present our CCS strategy, then our projects, and then our challenges. Why do we develop a CCS business within TotalEnergies? First, it comes within our mission to be carbon neutral by 2050, together with society. CCS will play its part. We believe that a quarter of our portfolio, of our energy mix, will still be composed of fossil fuels. And this will correspond to around 50 to 100 million tons of CO2. So we intend to develop 50 to 100 million tons per annum of CCS by 2050. That's for our own carbon neutrality. Then second is we believe that we have a real positive role to play to help the industry decarbonize, as has been said by the previous speakers. I mean, we want to provide that service. We see in Europe that for cement, lime, fertilizers, waste to energy, and chemical industry, decarbonization is at an acceptable price. Is not only a matter of competitiveness, but I would say it's a matter of survival for some industry. And in the US, the energy price is cheaper, 3 times cheaper than in Europe for gas, and decarbonization is also cheaper, at least for CCS. So we need to reduce that gap and avoid the localization of our industry to the other side of the Atlantic. And I think TotalEnergies has an important role to play in this field. And historically, we've been one of the first movers on CCS. It's not new for us. We developed a pilot in the south of France 10 years ago, between 2010 and 2013, with storage in a depleted gas field. So it's a technology that we know well. We've been storing CO2 in our Snøhvit field in Norway for years. So we believe, as Rodrigo said previously, that CCS is fairly mature. It's just a matter of aligning the business and the regulation to make it fly.
Etienne, thank you.
Our objectives, so that's
go on.
Our ambition, sorry. Then in a very more practical manner, what are our objectives for the next coming years? We want to inject 10 MTPA of CO2, to store 10 MTPA of CO2 in company share by 2030. We are very much on track to reach that objective. Our budget has increased from $10 million per year to from $100 million per year, to $300 million per year. So it has been multiplied by 3. It shows the very strong willingness of our top management to develop the CCS business. So in terms of project, what projects do we have? We are the only major European major with storage licenses in all the 4 big North Sea countries. Norway, Netherlands, UK, and Denmark. We have therefore a strong leadership in Europe, and Europe remains our main focus. If I start with the most mature project, we have Northern Lights in Norway, around 5 MTPA in 2 phases. We have a partnership there with Equinor and Shell. It's clearly a front runner. It's the first merchant CCS project in the world, as far as I know, and under construction. Construction of the first phase is 85% complete. We will start up beginning of 2025. We inject in the saline aquifer. And we have a second phase, a bigger phase. Phase 1 is 1.5 MTPA, phase 3.7. We have a second phase that is completed from a technical standpoint, and we are finalizing the market study and trying to get commitment, firm commitment from from emitters to be able to take the FID of that second phase. All the marketing of phase 1 is fully booked with cement industries, fertilizer, waste to energy, and power plant from biomass. It is a model with a transport by boat, which is a little bit more expensive than by pipe, but it has the advantage of flexibility. And for a first project, this flexibility is quite key. So how does it work in practice for this project? Basically, a given customer will take care of its CO2 capture on its plant. We lift the CO2 at its gate. We ship it to our terminal in Øygarden on the coast in Norway. Then once we have received the CO2, we send it by a 100-kilometer pipe to our offshore subsea facilities, where we inject it 3,000 meters deep in a saline aquifer. That's for the first project. The second project we have in terms of maturity is NEP, Northern Endurance Partnership in the UK. It's a 10 MTPA project in 3 phases. We are partnered with BP and Equinor. We inject also in a saline aquifer. Same thing, all the technical work is being completed, but in the UK, we finalized the front-end engineering and design. In the UK, it's regulated, and the discussions are ongoing with the authorities to finalize the definition of the business model, the project return, and all the business environment. It takes time. The FID will be taken next year if everything goes well. Then the third project we have is Aramis in Netherlands. It's by far the biggest of all our projects. We are pre-investing in a huge pipe, 22 MTPA, that reached in various phases. We are partnering with Shell, EBN, Gasunie, and Vopak. It's very different from the 2 first projects, as it's an injection depleted gas fields. Those fields, we know them very well because we've been operating those for many decades. We are just launching the front-end engineering and design. It's a very good news. The project is moving. Partners are putting money on the table because it's an phase. And as was said previously, the FID of Porthos, our project next door, has just been taken, which is an excellent news, as we will be using part of the facilities of Porthos in Rotterdam. Our fourth project is called Bifrost. It's a 5 MTPA project in Denmark. Denmark is a great country to do CCS. It has excellent storage sites, good geology. It is close to Germany emitters, and the authorities are very supportive. So, and TotalEnergies is the strongest player in the country. As you know, remember, maybe we bought Maersk a few years ago. So we are producing most of the oil and gas production of the country. So we are a strong player there, and we intend to develop CCS in that country. It's only at exploration stage at the moment. We just shot the seismic on the permits we have obtained 1 year ago, and we will drill a well. And we need to de-risk the geoscience part of that project before moving forward. And it's a mixture of saline aquifer and depleted gas fields. That's the 4 big projects we have. We have also quite a lot of projects around the world on our own assets to reinject the native CO2 we have in Australia, in Papua New Guinea, in Qatar, in many countries. And also we have a stronger business development activity in Europe. First, we believe that we still need to grow in Europe. We recently took a new license in Norway called Luna, where we intend to develop a big project with Wintershall as a partner. In the US, we are studying project in the US. We believe that the technical cost in the US is much cheaper than Europe, as I've already said, for many reasons. The emitters are very close to storage. They do onshore development, whereas in Europe, we consider only offshore development mainly for acceptability reasons. There is a network already existing, and the drilling costs for wells are much lower due to shale. So we think that CCS will start very strong in the US, but the project entry costs are quite high, as obviously the are similar than in Europe. You have the 45Q at $85 per ton, whereas the ETS is at around the same price. So the projects are very good return, and the price of entry is quite high. And it's
sure, absolutely. Etienne, sorry for calling for stopping you there, but I'm aware that we've got so many questions to get.
Okay.
So many delegates really interested in all of your views when we go through this. So, panelists, if I may, I'm going to try and get through as many questions as possible. If you could just give me a very short answer, and let's see how many different subjects we can touch upon, because it's great to flip from one subject to another. We've just had a lot about storage from Etienne, which is great. A question that keeps coming up is about hitting storage targets and whether or not there actually is enough commercially viable storage, either close to where it's needed, of the right type of storage, storage that will be easy to access and the technology is already ready for it. Johanna, I don't know whether you want to just kick us off with an answer to that one, because it's all very well having the technology or the desire rather to do this, but if you haven't got the storage, it's a non-starter.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. So are you talking specifically now on the Net Zero Industry Act or targets in general?
I think, well, if you'd like to address the targets in general, and then I'll go to talk about whether or not there is the right amount of storage to meet the targets. So do you think, first of all, Johanna, those targets are achievable, and if so, are they actually high enough?
Yeah. Okay, sure. So the short answer is yes, I think it's achievable. Actually, here in Brussels, we get a lot of feedback from stakeholders saying that they actually wanted us to raise the 50 million ton target even further. And I think if we're looking at, again, announced projects and not FIDs, but this can be summed up to quite a lot already. And Denmark was mentioned. I think they said at some point that they would be able to cover 52 million ton by 2030, both offshore and onshore, of course. And then if you also add the Norwegian continental shelf, I think they released a white paper on the field developments of Yggdrasil and Fenris, where they also proposed some capacity projections by 2030, adding up to 40 to 45 million tons of CO2. So yeah, but as I said, we need to reach the FIDs, and also, as was mentioned by the other speakers, if we are to reach climate neutrality by 2050, we need to scale it up to between 300 and 600 million tons. So yeah, it's quite a big step. So we have to scale it up quite a lot. Yeah.
Scale it up and scale up at speed. And Johanna, just before I go back to storage, just a very, very quick, another one from you. You've been talking a lot about the strategy. Quick question from Arena. When is it likely to be released, and can you do it before the CCUS forum in, I think it's the end of November, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. So our original plan was to announce it at the forum, but then, as I mentioned, we are doing this strategy now with DG Klima, and they wanted to see the strategy in connection with the 2040 targets. So now the plan is to publish both the strategy and also to see it in connection with the 2040 targets in the first quarter of 2024. That's the plan now. So it's, yeah, we of course want to have it as soon as possible, but I think the good thing now is that we will be able to have updated estimates on CCS projections, and also in terms of the targets. And as I said, maybe we will also be able to have like something in between the 50 million tons and the 600 million tons in 2050 to see like the curve where it can be. Yeah, thank you.
At the moment, that curve is rather like a rocket rather than a curve, and you need to see the points along the line. Jeroen, let's come back to you on the storage question, just briefly, if I may. Is there enough that's close in the right place, that's technologically feasible, financially feasible as well? Just your brief overview, if you may.
I think the answer is yes, certainly, in theory, in terms of we know that it exists, but the development of it in a timely fashion, I think, is another, as we've discussed, kind of already only two sort of storage projects under construction at the moment. Also wanted to flag that great policy support from the Commission, from the EU in terms of the Innovation Fund. In the 3 calls, it awarded some 30 plus CCUS projects, but most of these are capture projects. And if I don't know the numbers from the top of my head, but I think less than a quarter are in transport and storage. So I think there's a little bit of a concern in the industry that it's like a chicken and egg problem. And of course, capture projects seem to be a little bit, shall we say, further ahead. And also in terms of storage development, again, Johanna talked about Denmark and talked about Norway, and we know the North Sea is perhaps sort of further ahead in the game, but we also need storage in the Mediterranean, in the south, because great paper from Clean Air Task Force, if we manage to develop storage facilities closer to the relevant capture facilities, there's so much more efficiencies to be had, economic gains, etc. So I think there are some questions to be answered on that front. In theory, yes, but we need more work to do.
I think that's a good answer. In theory, yes, but more work to be done. On that point, I'm just going to do the quickest round ever of all 4 of you, if I may, because the speed is the crucial thing here. So if there was one thing that you could just magically make better or erase as a problem, what would it be? To push the speed forward. Rodrigo, I'll come to you first. Just one thing that you could just magically erase or magically sort out.
Well, I think I listed a few things that need to all come together.
Just one really brief.
I think the main thing for investors to move and for our customers to and all the emitters to design and execute the plan is a policy that gives them certainty and that is reliable, so that the risk is decreased. There is enough, not much technical risk, but there is financial risk, there is all sorts of risk. But if we can manage to have a policy in place that gives them certainty, everything else will follow, I believe.
Brilliant. Okay, so you would say number 1 of your wish list is to sort out policies. Etienne, for you would be?
Of course, to reduce the risk, but also to make sure that people invest in hubs. I think emitters and storers tend to do what they do best. So emitters to do the capture and storers to do the offshore part or the storage part. But in between, there are those hubs that are absolutely necessary. It needs to come quickly. They are very capitalistic, and we need state support to develop this part of the value chain.
Okay, so that you're talking finances there, okay, and the state support you're talking about. Johanna, for you?
So I guess it's a cliche, but the whole chicken and egg dilemma, I would say, is key here, the coordination. So it's also related to, risk reduction, having certainty, but connecting the dots in the value chain. And I agree with what Jeroen said as well, that we need to make sure that it's not only a development in the North Sea, even though this is most mature now, but we want to see all parts of Europe being connected. Yeah.
Not to forget Mediterranean areas, you were saying, Jeroen, but top of your wish list, one area to tackle, what would it be?
I think shortening permitting and the regulatory timelines, particularly for transport and storage.
Yeah, going back to concentrating on the transport there as well. we are out of time on this panel. It's been really interesting to get your updates, to get your thoughts, and to get your opinions. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you as well for all your questions. I hope you've got at least some of the answers. I know there are a lot more answers to get, but if I could thank my panelists for your time this afternoon, it's been really good to hear your thoughts. Thank you. And we have another panel to come in just a few minutes as we dive deeper into this and we start to look at pyrolysis and BECCS as well, to look at more technologies and look at other challenges and how they can be overcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 10-minute break. If we have you here in actually about 5-6 minutes or so, and we'll crack on with our second panel. Thank you for your attention. Hello, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. And you are joining us for a Eurogas event as we look at technology, new technology, or maybe I should say old technology that's suddenly under everybody's spotlight and opinion. We're talking about CCS, CCUS, pyrolysis, BECCS, the whole entire value chain, or that value chain that is currently being created, that is so needed for the transition of the industry. If you've been with us, you know that we have heard from several experts who've given updates on what is needed to bring this whole value chain to fruition, what the challenges are for the industry, the entire industry, and indeed what the challenges are for different parts of the industries that are trying to tap into this. We know the targets are there, but we have heard from people saying that they need predictable policies, they need investment, they need more skills within the workplace, those that can actually embrace and push forward this particular part of the transition. So for our next panel this afternoon, we're going to look at European leadership in bioenergy with carbon capture and storage and pyrolysis. Look at also BECCS as well, those carbon negative or potentially carbon negative solutions. So allow me to introduce my next of panelists. We have João Duarte, who's the EMEA representative to EU institutions from Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Lovely to have you with us, João. Matti Malkimäki, the chairman of the board and founder of Hysamite TCD Technologies. We have Zoltan Elek, the CEO of Landwarmer, and Yves Taim, the chair of the Zero Emissions Platform. So thank you all for joining us. It's good to have you there. Good to have you this afternoon. And I know we're going to get through a lot of questions, a lot of good and different opinions on how this industry goes forward. So if you are watching us and you're now looking at our various experts and thinking that you'd like to hear them answer a question that you have, or indeed talk a little more about a particular area, particular subject that you want to know more about, just fill in the Q&A box on your screen. I can see your questions here and I can ask lots of them to our panelists. So let's start. I'm going to ask you all, if I may, just to give me a one-word answer, if you can, on a scale of 1 to 10 of where you think the industry is. So I have to say, I asked my first group of panelists the same questions. So how far along the line do you feel we are to having a secure and well-established CCS and pyrolysis full value chain within the EU? So, I mean, we do know that we are more towards the beginning, but 1 would be just starting out, going through to 10, which is all parts thriving, full potential met, all targets met, lots of innovation, lots of connected sectors all thriving. So how far along those lines are you? 1, just starting out, 10, everything meeting full potential. João, where do you think we are? 1 to 10?
Good afternoon, Sasha. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here. If I would have to average it out and choose 1 value, I would say 5. If I squeeze into 2 and I say, well, we look at technology and MHI as a technology provider, I would say we are more towards the 8, 9 level of readiness, right? But when it comes to everything that goes around that, which are the policy and regulatory frameworks to enable these, well, we are more on a 5. So
okay, so 5 for the policy and for the enablers, but you're saying that the tech is really there. So everything is just waiting to go. Matti, what about you? I wonder whether, being from the technological side, you'd say something quite similar.
I also need to divide my wording here, but first of all, thank you for inviting me here, and it's been really follow these seminars also earlier. So I don't think that we are that far in the regulation that was just mentioned. Sorry about that. But there I would say 3, because there's a lot of stuff that what we need to do still in the regulation. Pyrolysis is generally not that well recognized within the European Union. Regarding the technology, I would say that we are somewhere between 7 and 8. There's still some bits to do, especially on the carbon side, on the solid carbon side, but generally speaking, the technology seems to be maturing quite well.
Okay, 7 and 8 on technology, but actually you've been a bit more negative on policies and regulation at going for 3. Okay, interesting. Zoltan, what about you? I wonder whether you can answer this question.
Yeah, thank you for having me here too. I would agree, especially on the technology side, as the others said. I think we have, at least from the economics, we are very far. So I think there are business cases around CCS, which, especially with bioenergy, which already work today. So I would give there an 8. If it comes to the logistics, and then we are really at 1 or 2. So we face a challenge that if we don't really speed up establishing a CO2 backbone, we're going to transport 1 million tons of CO2 around in trucks, and that's a horrible vision at the end of the decade. So this is something we have to really look into, because transportation of the CO2 to the storage sites will be a challenge, and we don't want to do that on the road.
That's a very, very low score. I see where you are coming from. So 1 or 2 on the transportation. Okay. Mm-hmm. Eve, what about you from the zero emissions platform? Interesting. Where would you put it?
Thank you for a great question to get us started, and thanks for the invitation. So I was very surprised to hear such high numbers. I do agree that in terms of technology and what is already possible these days, we're doing well. But the reality is that the infrastructure is just not there. And although, yes, there are areas where the business cases are emerging, we don't have a nice and solid project pipeline still. So we need so much more on the policy side to kickstart things and to incentivize these projects to come up and running. So I would say, in terms of where we are today and thinking where we should be in a couple of decades, we are in a very early stages. I would say 2 or 3. There is so much more that needs to happen to really get these projects up and running in Europe.
It's really interesting hearing you all categorize it, because nobody is going to argue that we're at an early stage. But it's interesting the way you've put your numbers for different parts and different facets of the industry. Thank you. What Eurogas has done is asked all of our panelists to just take a couple of minutes to give their perspective, their thoughts and opinions of when they look at CCS or BECCS or pyrolysis and EU leadership and where we are within different member states. So if I can go round the room again, so to speak, from Mitsubishi, do you want to start us off? Just take a couple of minutes to outline how you see this world.
Of course. Thank you, Sasha. So just before I start, just a couple of words about MHI and who we are and what we do. We are a global, which perhaps also will help to explain my optimism. I guess, well, we are a global company with headquarters in Tokyo and a very strong presence here in EMEA. We have a wide range of solutions to support the energy transition, and we set ourselves a target of carbon neutrality by 2040, so 10 years ahead of the 1.5 degrees and the government's pledges, simply because as enablers of those transitions, we think we need to be ahead. And this is for scope 1, 2, and 3. We do these along different lines. We look into electrification, energy efficiency, hydrogen, and carbon capture, or carbon management, broadly speaking. We bring 20 plus years of experience in carbon capture. around the globe. And we have today 15 plants under operation and 3 under construction, one of them in Italy. So technology works. This has been deployed mostly in the chemical, in the fertilizer sector. And when we started, this was not because there was a decarbonization quest, a demand for carbon neutrality. Carbon capture actually proved to be a process efficiency measure in the urea production case, which is very interesting, I find, especially when I hear the debates on efficiencies and carbon capture. So we have that experience on carbon capture, but we also have solutions across the value chain. We have shipping solutions for carbon, for CO2. We have compression, liquefaction. So we are really active, and we are also global companies. That's why I was perhaps a bit more optimistic. When it comes to BECCS, drugs in the UK has been for a long time the flagship, European flagship. The first BECCS project developed in Europe, but for reasons we have discussed also in the earlier panel, which I followed with great interest, it has not reached FID yet. So I guess there are reasons to be optimistic, and I will finish here with these. I work a lot in the hydrogen sector as well. So this egg and chicken issue has been the talk of the day for the past, let's say, 5 years. And I think the carbon management community, if you want to call it like that, has already gone through a first phase back in 2008, 2009 of discussions. We have collected some learnings, and we are already organizing also thanks to the Commission with the CCUS forum. So we are already talking together. So I think that there is reason to be optimistic.
That's João, thank you. I like the way that you've summarized that, and I think we can all see why you feel that there is optimism, but very clearly what everyone else is saying, projects are not getting those FIDs, and there is a lot still of barriers in the way. Thank you. Any questions for João? Please do put them into the Q&A box. We'll try and get through as many as possible. Matti, would you like to go next? What are your views? What are your thoughts? Where do you stand in this?
Thank you, Susanne. If I may start the same way than João started, so that just a couple of words about what Hycamite is. So we are a pyrolysis company. We like to call it methane splitting, because this is a technology that is based on the catalyst families that we have by ourselves. We are commercializing technology that has roots in the Finnish university research over 20 years. The company is relatively new, a little bit less than 4 years old, but we have already more than 40 people. We have had the pilot plant working with a biogas for more than 2 years now already. And we are now building the first industrial scale demonstration unit that will have a capacity of 2,000 tons of hydrogen per year. So when we are talking about the carbon capture, when I mentioned about the carbon utilization in my first answer to your question, I'm talking about solid carbon products that are being extracted from methane. Our carbon products are in the form of carbon nanofibers, so we can use them in electroconductive appliances or applications like lithium-ion batteries and so forth. And we have worldwide coverage on this one. We've been funded by not Finnish investors, but also from a Japanese conglomerate associates and some oil and gas major companies worldwide. Our market or primary market is at the moment in USA. And the reason why we are there is practically so that the US regulation at the moment, based on all the Inflation Reduction Act and so forth, does recognize the pyrolysis or this kind of methane splitting technologies. whereas here in Europe it doesn't. So this is the reason why I gave the quite low number on the regulation, so that we do have elements in the regulation in the Europe for the utilization of the carbon products also in the solid form, and we do have some parts for the bio energies and so forth, biogas, biomethanes. So this is all there. But when you really think about the pyrolysis technologies or methane splitting technologies, carbon capture pre-combustion, if you will, this is not recognized in the regulation of hydrogen or in the regulation of the carbon capturing either. And this is something that I think that we need to really emphasize a lot when we are talking about going to get the Europe to be ahead of the game. So at the moment, unfortunately, I do see it that way, that USA, Canada, Japan, Australia are moving faster in this field. And I think that we really need to change this, because if you have a look on other methane pyrolysis companies or other technologies that are evolving this way, I think the majority actually of these companies are in Europe. So that there are some in USA and some in Australia, but there's quite a lot of projects and developments happening here in the USA, and it's a really big shame if we are getting behind in this scheme. So that was my brief moment for the beginning.
No, absolutely, Matt. Thank you very much, because what you're saying is, you know, it's contradicting what we have heard from the MEP Tsvetelina Penkova, who was saying very much that her desire was, as you would understand, to keep the focus within member states, to have the whole value chain there. We've also heard from the Commission earlier today, to keep the value chain within the member states, unless, of course, they're talking about critical raw materials. But to have everybody work here and sort of, you know, keep the investment here as well. But what you're saying is the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in the States, has made it easier for you to push forward there. I mean, what do you need then for entrepreneurs as yourself? I mean, you're a startup yourself. What do you need for entrepreneurs to say, actually, the EU member states here, this is the place where new technology can flourish and we can really push forward with this?
Question, thank you for that. So that we have, I've been entrepreneur for more than 20 years in Europe, mostly in Germany and then also in Finland. And I'm pretty well aware, I would say, about the European investment funding possibilities, I mean, innovation funding possibilities that what we have on a European level, like EICs and so forth, IPCEI project, but also some of the member state financing possibilities. As a company, we've also been approaching and been approached by DOE in USA regarding that what kind of award systems they have. And I need to say that when you compare the European financing possibilities for new technologies, we do put a lot of money and a lot of effort on the university researches generally. But when it comes to commercialization, there seems to be a bit of gap within the Europe in that sense, so that there are hardly any states that really think that, okay, how we can really get this deep tech that is being developed in the universities to be commercialized. And this is something that I think that USA is ahead of us. They have these national laboratories, they have REPowerEU, they have DOE, AMR programs and so forth that really focus on getting the products out. And when we are talking about solid carbon capturing, for example, in Europe, for example, graphite is described as a critical material. It is coming from China most at the moment, and it's very, very much needed in battery industry and so forth. USA is the same, but still, if you compare these two areas, USA at the moment is the only one of these two that is actually funding the local graphite production, synthetic graphite production out of the IRA system. So this is something that they are saying that, okay, we should really start making these products and not only like pilots or something like that one. So they are really good on commercializing new technologies.
Very, very clear what your view, what your opinion is. I don't know whether that's going to be contradicted or enforced by our next two speakers. But Zoltan, let's come to you, because what are you doing at the moment? And are you sort of finding the same barriers that that Matty's been talking about? Give us your example.
Yes, I want to present a little bit the company too. So Landwärme is a biomethane trader supplier. So our main focus is producing biomethane or bringing it to the consumers. But we launched several CCS projects, and some are already online. It's mainly pilot projects to show that the value chain is working, to show that the economics are working. And I think looking at carbon capture, and if you combine it with something like biomethane, this is really, it's carbon capture with benefits. And I think that is what we are driving, because it's not just turning something which was a source of emission into zero emission, or turning or creating negative emission as you do with direct air capture, but we combine different areas. And so we produce renewable methane, which is needed because we want to be independent from the fossil sources. It's included in the circular economy if you use organic waste, if you use the residues out of the fermentation as a fertilizer. So it's creating a lot of benefits around the project. And that is what we want to show with the different cases. One of the projects which started this summer is in Eastern Germany, in Dresden, where we have a biogas plant which is running on organic waste collected from the household, from restaurants and so on, which generates biomethane. And then we added the liquefaction because carbon capture is already part of the regular process. From turning biogas to biomethane, it's mainly taking out the CO2 of the biogas stream. And liquefaction is a challenging because we have to do it small scale. It's an additional investment we have to do at most of the sites. And it's the only way to transport the CO2 currently in an economic way. And what we do there with the CO2 is we bring it to a site where concrete is recycled. So it's combined with concrete from old buildings, which is then turned into gravel, and CO2 can be added, around 50 kilograms per ton of recycled concrete, but it's then used mainly for road building and so on. So this is a good case because this works decentral. This works already today. It's a long-term storage, but it's something where we can do on a decentral level and also on a local level, just to show, okay, we are going there, we can do it. But in the long run, if you look at the big numbers, Commission said we want to see 35 BCM biomethane by 2030, an ambitious target, a target which we could still reach if we get on track. But a target, if you really combine it with CCS, would generate 50 million tons of CO2. And that's a really nice benefit, but also a challenge, because 50 million tons coming from 10,000, like perhaps 50,000 points of origin, it's going to be a challenge to collect that, to bring that efficiently to the storage sites. And I think from the part of the industry where we talk to the storage site, there are a lot of projects out there which can handle 50 million tons. At least in the development, but we have to combine these two sides. And we are a very cheap source of CO2 because we have the separation already integrated in the biomethane production. Now we have to connect the different dots.
It's very, very interesting. And actually that, totally, Zoltan, that echoes one of the questions that we've had actually to put to you. A comment about actually the challenge is always going to be the transportation, but collecting from different distributed locations, and whether or not it's the finance that goes alongside that, or actually the technological difficulties, the logistical difficulties as well. Thank you. Eve, let me come to you now. So from the zero emissions platforms, just remind us of who you represent. That's a lot of different industries and companies there.
Indeed. Well, indeed, I'm Eva Tamme, the chair of Zero Emissions Platform, and our platform is actually very broad, which results, because of the broadness, in very balanced views and recommendations that we can provide, and we serve as an advisor to the European Union on the of CCU and CCS, so that's where we feed in our expertise and advice. So our membership covers oil and gas companies, industry, utilities, equipment suppliers, trade unions, environmental NGOs. So it's very broad. So it's not one-sided. It's very different stakeholders that are very keen on increasing the deployment of these technologies in Europe. And we work mostly on traditional carbon capture and storage as an emission reduction technology, but also on BECCS and DACS. So DACS is direct air capture with carbon storage, which are both carbon removal technologies. And obviously we will need these carbon removal technologies to be able to achieve the European climate neutrality target in 2050. Our organization is also quite old already. It has been around for almost 20 years. And given this revived coming of CCS these years, there is, of course, so much more we are doing. A lot more we're doing also on the policy landscape, making sure that we have the right conditions in place to get these technologies deployed. So our membership is expanding as a result, though. So these are very exciting times for these technologies. But quickly, I think it's important to highlight some of the basic things we always need to bear in mind. We talk about carbon removal technologies like BECCS. And at Zero Emissions Platform, we use 4 key principles to evaluate against, to make sure that we actually talk about carbon removal technology. And these are, first, that the CO2 is actually physically removed from the atmosphere, either directly or via biomass. And that's via biomass is the BECCS option, obviously. Then it's stored away, that CO2 from the atmosphere, in a manner that is intended to be permanent, so very durably, and that all emissions upstream and downstreams are taken into account. And that's very important specifically for carbon removal methods like BECCS, because it's a very broad system, and where you put the boundaries really matters. And as a result, you need to know that the total quantity of CO2 that has been removed is actually bigger than the one that has been emitted as part of all these activities. And BECCS is actually going to be very interesting, especially for countries in the Nordic area of the EU. So we have Sweden, Finland, Denmark, that have a lot of biomass availability, but they also have conditions for geological storage of CO2. So that helps a lot. I mean, and not every country has it. I'm Estonian, and Estonia has a lot of forests, but we don't have any storage. So the challenge with different carbon removal methods is that where a specific country is located geographically really defines what kind of solutions it can deploy. And BECCS is going to be important in many existing industries in Europe, like in paper, ethanol, biogas, waste to energy, just a basic biomass retrofitting as well. So it's something that we need to create conditions for. But as I mentioned in the very beginning, as a response to the opening question, we are really far away from creating those conditions. Especially, I mean, obviously, I heard very last part of the previous panel. I know Maria Jo was more involved and heard most of it. So I don't know what else was there that I missed and I might be repeating. But if we look at incentives for carbon removal technologies like BECCS, we have very little that currently exists. We have some funding from the Innovation Fund that helps. Permitting that was mentioned is going to be important for sure. We need, and as it already has echoed in this panel, we need to have the infrastructure in place, because you can capture all you want, but if you have nowhere to send that CO2, it doesn't work out. So the whole that we constantly keep discussing the chicken and egg problem, but we do have many policy initiatives in the pipeline currently that could be very helpful for these technologies. Obviously, the Net Zero Industry Act with its CO2 storage injection target or objective. We have currently the work ongoing on carbon removal certification framework, where specifically yesterday methodologies for BECCS were discussed at the expert group on this specific topic. The upcoming 2040 targets is going to be crucial because we would really want to see a specific target, a separate target for permanent carbon removals, including those like BECCS, that would be set separately from emission reductions, because we do know that we prioritize reducing emissions, but we also need to start scaling up removals. And we need to do it in a way that we need to scale up removals in a way that we don't threaten reducing emissions swiftly. So having these separate targets and also focusing that we need to start scaling up these kind of permanent removals is crucial. So the first quarter of next year, with the 2040 targets, with the industrial carbon management strategy, with hopefully the carbon removal certification framework agreed, create hopefully much better conditions for these kind of technologies to be deployed. But some of these details we still need to find out how they will look like. And from our side, we will do the best to make sure that this will all help us to move in a direction where we need, keeping that ultimate goal in mind.
There are a lot of details still to be worked out, and you've raised a lot of points there, Yves. Because one of the first things you said is that you're one of the policy advisors. You do talk to the Commission, you suggest different things, you talk on behalf of your membership. I'm going to come back to Matti, if I may, because you said very clearly you thought it was the policy issue that was the roadblock in member states, whereas you were saying you were able to go further ahead in the US because of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. Is the Net Zero Industry Act in the EU to be able to help push you in the way that you hope it will, in the way that Yves is talking about?
We need to remember that when I'm talking about carbon capturing, I'm talking about solid carbon capturing, and all this carbon capturing that we are talking in European Union at the moment is actually carbon dioxide capturing, and this is the problem that what we have, so that the systems for including pre-combustion carbon capturing, where we actually have this benefit of getting the carbon in the solid form and don't have these issues that Yves was quite rightly putting out, so that we don't have the need for example, to estimate that where we can storage this, because actually if you put solid carbon in a mine, it stays there. That's like the easiest solution. But on the other hand, we can also utilize this as a raw material for decarbonizing other industries. So that, for example, when we are talking to lithium-ion battery providers, they have approximately 66 kilos average now carbon in an electric vehicle battery, and this carbon has a carbon footprint, carbon. But anyway, so in order to reduce that carbon dioxide footprint of this solid carbon that they are using, we could use this kind of materials and further decarbonize other industries as well. Zoltan was quite rightly also talking about the CO2 capturing in the concrete, and so solid carbon can also be used there. And when we are going for different solutions, the solid carbon capturing has a huge potential, and this is why when I'm going to speak in various events all over the world, the people are really seeing that, okay, this actually makes sense, because the CO2 storaging or having these infrastructures in place to store that carbon dioxide is not needed in this technology. And this is something that I really think that the European Union should take into the consideration in the regulation, and it is at the moment not there.
Okay, Matti, thank you. Any of our panelists want to come in on that at all? João, do you want to come in? Yves, do you want to come back in on that, or Zoltan? I mean, I'm very, very conscious of time, and it's great to get your views and opinions on lots of different areas. So I tell you what we'll do then. Let's pause on policies and actually look at everything else that could be a barrier. We haven't touched on investment in this panel, so let me throw investment over to you and get your views and opinions on that. And we can just widen that out and talk about money. So we can talk about public-private as well, if you would like, as to where the money needs to come from to push this forward. Zoltan, do you want to start us off? Is there enough investment in this technology, or where in the value chain is more money?
I think at the beginning we said technology is quite far. So I think innovation is always good, and we should continue to make improvement in technology, but we have to support the different steps in the value chain. And where we need big investments is a backbone CO2 gas grid on the one side. And on the other side, also see the aspects that there are different technologies. So I can do bioenergy CCS on a big wood-based power plant, or perhaps an old coal power plant, where you would invest several €100 million, or you do it in a completely different level, and then for a renewable biomethane plant to go the step to say I want to liquefy and so on, to integrate that. This is just an additional €1 million or €2 million investment. Still, then we need some instrument in place which support that. And the Innovation Fund is more looking for big projects, very much fit to this decentral project. So we have to close that gap and enable also small-scale funding.
Eve, what about private investment? Is there enough going in from industry itself, or do you sort of feel a little like Zoltan that actually, the technology is advanced enough? It isn't actually that sort of private investment in technology that's needed now. It's investment elsewhere.
Well, the challenge is, I would say, still quite a bit the business case for that investment to come in. Some examples we see in Europe are investments are coming in through the voluntary carbon market, for example. So that's the deal with Ørsted and in the BECCS plant in Denmark, for example. But I think currently, obviously, we will need to end up with a combination of public and private funding. On the public side, we will see some mechanisms being used more, and maybe some others being created on the EU level, and that's going to be helpful. But that is always going to be in parallel with specific policies that member states themselves put in place. And these are going to look very different, as we already see now. We have Sweden doing reverse auctions, for example, for BECCS. And so we will have carbon contracts for difference. A version of that is already available for CCUS in the Netherlands. So we will have these different mechanisms, and some of the questions are also going to be around how do you combine them, whether it's the national and EU money, or, for example, when we talk about leveraging carbon markets, and that now relates, for example, to the European Union forthcoming carbon removal certification framework, how that relates to, for example, if voluntary carbon market is being used to fund a project like this, how can this project also use public funding to kind of bridge the gap, or which part of the funding actually bridges the gap? And these are discussions we are still having very actively. There are no final answers, but we need to agree on the pathway, what tools will become available, and what is okay to do and what is not okay to do as well, because otherwise it's very difficult to take those business decisions and make investment decisions if that's not clear. And currently we are in a few places a bit in a grey area.
Okay, thank you, Eve. Let me throw another couple of questions at you all, if that's okay. We've heard, this is a question from Tim, or actually more of a point opinion from someone who's watching you. They said basically he's heard lots of different member states being mentioned, and indeed we have, even when it comes to storage or different projects. He says, we've not heard Germany mentioned at all. Have they missed the CCS train, or is there any hope left? I don't know, Eve, do you want to come in on that one, or a quick word on Germany?
I don't know the specific timeline, but I know that they are catering their path, and they have changed their mind, or they're in a process of changing their mind about CCS. So it's not something that's completely off the table anymore. And we're noticing similar tendencies in other member states that used to be completely anti-CCS, like Austria, for example. So it's just this reality is sinking in that countries will need these technologies too, in addition to everything else that will be needed, and they need to establish their strategies and make it possible to deploy them.
Thank you. We haven't spoken about this, and actually I'm just going to give you a moment to address this, because it is potentially another huge challenge, and that's the skills gap, and that's the people, whether it's reskilling, retraining, or bringing them into the industry. Because even though this technology has been around for a while, it is only really just suddenly starting to enter into people's consciousness, and therefore that means people coming to work in the industry, and the industry having the correct skills in the right place as well. So, Jeroen, let me ask you, I mean, is the skills factor something that you sort of have on the top of your list, or on your list?
It's definitely one of the skills and capacities. I think it's those two elements of what we see missing to really get this going. We don't have enough skilled workforce to work on these technologies. We built some in the past, and this was slowly lost. And we are now seeing this very rapid development, and we need to really keep up with it. So that's something we are looking at very carefully. But also capacities. We can't go from 0 to 0 in a couple of months or years. So this really has to be a build-up. And that's where this policy certainty and these regulatory frameworks that are missing really need to come. This carbon management strategy that the EU will put forward will help. And just to bring in some elements from the discussion just before, the US is definitely, or has been, that's our impression in carbon capture. They have extremely appealing funding opportunities. The IRA was based on this 45Q tax credit system, has always been helping. What they also have is infrastructure, is CO2 pipelines, a vast one, which we do not have. And that's linked to a heritage, which is the oil and gas heritage. So there are, and Eve alluded to that, locational points that we need to make. When I talk to my colleagues, however, in the US, at least for carbon capture and storage, there are lots of announcements, lots of excitement, but there are also no FIDs. And there, the reason is partially because they are lagging behind on this policy framework, on this certainty to move ahead. And Europe at the end is extremely complex, but it tries to put the funding, the public funding, and I agree that the private, industry needs to bring also the money, but brings that and the policy framework, that it's not perfect, it's far from being complete, but there are steps towards it, and we are completing it.
All right, Thank you, João. So many different points. I tell you what I'm going to do, because it's a good place to leave this, is to actually ask all of you if there was just one thing that you could, put your finger on as being the thing that needs to be tackled first, or maybe is the biggest barrier. And I wonder if I'm going to get 4 answers of regulation and policy or not. Maybe you'll come up with something else. But let's go around the table. So, João, would you like to go first? The one thing that you wish you could erase.
Can I turn it around and say the only thing I really would like to have would be political buy-in for these technologies? Because I think a lot is still there.
Okay, so political buy-in for technologies. So you're saying it's there, but more.
I don't think it's political buy-in. True political buy-in is there for carbon management that it's not there. I don't think it is there. That's one crucial thing. Another thing, which I think would use, and I'm sorry, but that I think would really help with the business cases, is really look at also the demand markets. We talk about removing carbon or CO2 from processes that manufacture cement, steel, and so on. So these products, which will be low carbon products, should have a market where they are actually valued for that attribute. And that is not there. I think public procurement, for instance, could play a role and would de-risk that situation and help with the business cases or business models that we constantly say are not yet there because they're not.
So coming back down to the business models and even just geographical locations and just sort of seeing what is possible and what should be pushed as well. Matthew, let me come to you just very briefly, if you can. The big sticking point, or maybe like João, you'd like to say what the most important thing is?
I think that from generally speaking, technology neutral regulation overall, because we do have in place quite a lot of standards and regulation for how to calculate the life cycle emissions and all this kind of stuff. We have ISO standards and this way. But for some reason, when we are talking about hydrogen, CCS, CCUS, and so forth, the regulation defines technologies. And we should not do that, because if we think that by 2050 we want to be carbon neutral, that means that we also need to be carbon negative somewhere. And 25 years is a long time to develop technologies and so forth. If you think about what we had 25 years ago, and what is the technology concept, what we have now, for example, in the mobile phones, huge steps. And I think that in carbon capturing, in hydrogen, in all of these that what we are talking now, there will be huge steps. And the politicians should really focus on making the goals and defining the rules of how we calculate the emissions, because that's all what counts. What goes into the atmosphere, and not that whether we are using this or that technology. The CO2 emissions, that's what counts.
So very, very much from you, a plea for tech neutrality. Zoltan, from you.
I think on a long-term perspective, we need a market for negative emissions. So really to create a market as we have now, market for reducing or avoiding emissions, we need a market for negative emissions where parts of the industry, either it's direct air capture or bioenergy with CCS, provides this service to society, and that should have a price. And that should enable investment and new concepts on a global level. And I think that could be a nice one.
Okay, thank you. And Eve, a final word from you.
Thank you. That's the important role. I will make the most of it. From our perspective, the one key thing that could unlock many would be a separate climate target for permanent carbon removal methods for 2040, and then having a clear vision for implementing that target, because then everything will trickle down from that, the funding, the regulation, the building the infrastructure for those solutions where it's needed, permitting, the use of markets, and all of that.
Very much echoing your earlier point. Eve, thank you very much for underlying that. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this panel, with lots of different points raised, different views, different opinions on what the EU is doing, and indeed what's happening within the industry in a wider context as well. Can I just thank my panelists for their time, their views, their opinions, their thoughts, very considered thoughts on the way forward. Panel, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that just leaves me now to hand to Eurogas and James Watson from Eurogas. Lots of different things for you to think about, I think.
Yeah, Sasha, thanks so much for the great moderation as ever. Really, we've had so many interesting points of view, great technologies, you know, from the whole direction that we had there with Hycamite, talking about pyrolysis and, yeah, indeed, the sort of solid carbon, very different to carbon capture and storage as it's often seen, where, you know, we'd have gaseous CO2 going underground. I think also the very interesting points from GE earlier on and looking at the technologies they're looking to bring. And I think, you know, a lot of people always wondered about whether or not post-combustion technology would ever come back into fashion. So I thought it really, really interesting. I had a great level of political discussion. I think some really good insights in the market. There was a very fair smattering of optimism and pessimism, I would say. It depends on what issue that you're touching on. I think one thing everyone was agreed on, though, Sasha, is that this is not a new technology, but it is in need of a new push. I think that everybody was very clearly saying that, you know, this is a technology that's been around, it's safe, it's something we've used, something that we know, but at the moment it's probably underperforming and we need to make sure we have the right regulatory framework to go forward. I would probably afford myself to be a bit more optimistic and say with the 50 million tonnes, we are creating a policy framework that looks like it would actually, you know, drive people and member states to take action. And so I think there are reasons to have footholds in the optimistic camp. But again, you know, you've also mentioned it there in the last panel, talking about skills, training. There's going to be a whole lot of work to be done to make sure we get the right kind of workforce in place. This whole energy transition is going to be really quite an undertaking. There's no two ways about it. But overall, both panels are really fascinating. And I do think that we have touched on the main points. Look, I would only add up by saying that in the end, carbon capture and storage has had a bumpy ride in Europe so far. It's 15 years almost since the 2008 CCUS directive came out. However, more recently, we are seeing that in relation to the climate change situation that we're facing, which is increasingly looking more daunting, you see people like the IPCC, the IEA coming out and saying that if we don't do carbon capture and storage, we will not get to that 1.5 degrees target that we've set ourselves. So I do believe that there is a very strong reason for building carbon capture and storage into our strategies now. I also found on the second panel it was interesting to look at BECCS and also to see, you know, I think Matty made the point as well about how we definitely need to make sure that we have that negative emissions because we're aiming for net zero, not absolute zero in 2050 on emissions. And of course, there'll be some sectors where there may still be emissions. And if you have negative, you really are making sure you can offset it. I also found it very interesting saying that, you know, his byproduct could be used for graphite and so on and so forth to cut the overall CO2 footprints from batteries. So there's a lot of system integrated thinking going on behind the scenes there. And I think we can all say that we've learned a lot today. Well, I certainly have. So great thanks to you, Sasha. Really great moderation as ever. And thanks to your panelists. Really some really great insights. And I think that, you know, we can say thanks to all of them and bringing those points of view across. So the point about Germany missing the bus, I had the feeling that actually we should all make sure we don't miss the bus. I don't think it's just a German problem. We must all make sure we don't miss the bus here, otherwise we will be standing in the rain. I know, and I have to say as well, thanks to GE Vernova. Really great to have them as partnering. It's really great to hear Rodrigo today, and I think, you know, they have a very important role to play in the EU to help us make our CCS system work. And then finally, of course, I will say thanks to our keynote speakers this afternoon. They've been absolutely brilliant. Of course, the team and the technicians here at the studio help us deliver really first-class events. So huge thanks to them. And my final thanks goes to you, the participants who come, who watch this, who send your questions in. We really enjoy that. Eurogas is very much open for dialogue. We're really happy to have the chance to hear from you and really make sure that your voice can also be heard and put to the experts that we find who are able to speak on these topics. This isn't the end of the Eurogas events this year. We may be heading towards the end of October. We've still got plenty of things to come. On the 9th of November, we will have a Let's Meet, again an online meeting open to everybody, where we'll be looking at the greenhouse gas protocol and the way that it's treating various renewable gases and whether or not they have the right sort of market-based systems being put in place and getting the right recognition for biomethane through them there. On the 28th, we will be in Portugal and Lisbon in person. I'll be very happy to see you there. We will have our annual regional conference with the help of FLOEN, and we will be looking at things like the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and its impact on housing and buildings, of course, in the area, but also how renewable gases are being developed in Portugal. They have some really absolute lighthouse projects, great green hydrogen projects working together between FLOEN and Bosch. So overall, I think there's going to be a great conference. So mark your diaries, 28th of November. Otherwise, in the end, I have to say thanks again to everybody for making this happen. I hope you all have a very great evening, and I hope you've really enjoyed the whole of the event this afternoon and the great insight that we've had from the experts that we've been able to bring to you today. Looking forward to seeing you at the next one. Best regards to everyone. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.